Yo, what's up aliens? AHEE here with another tutorial. Today I'm going to be covering the topic of, is mixing more important than mastering? First of all, both things are obviously very important, but I want to show you why mixing is sort of overlooked, I feel like, in some people's minds, and how some people may rely on mastering too much to get that clean, perfect sound that they're looking for in their mixes, and some ways that y'all might be able to improve your own mixes through these techniques. So I'm going to show y'all a song that just came out. It's called Be This Funk with K+Lab. And it was just released on Westwood Recordings, which is the Funk Hunters record label. I'll play y'all bits of it. What's pretty cool is that Zed's Dead actually just added it to their Spotify playlist, so I'll put a link to that. Definitely go check that out. So I'm going to play the first drop of the song with and without the mastering chain on it, so that way y'all can hear the difference. So here it is with the mastering chain on. Cool, and now here it is without the mastering chain. Cool. So you see we're super clipping there without the mastering chain on, but I don't know if you noticed, but there really wasn't that much big of a difference between the two. And that's what I want to go over today, is how to achieve that result. So for this tutorial, I'm going to turn off my ozone here just because it eats up so much CPU. What I'm doing in here is essentially, I'm not even using these. I'm just putting the sub in mono, boosting, widening the sides a little bit, and then doing the limiting here with the transient emphasis on. And you can see here that it's actually just ducking the snare. I'll show you later on why it's ducking it so much. But you can see it there going up to like -8 and 10, while the rest of it's sitting at like -2. Cool, so I'm going to turn that off. Something I want to mention is that a big reason why I'm able to get this loud in the mix is because I have limiters on almost all of my groups here, and including a pre-master with a Pro L on it as well. And most of them, they're just sitting at, like, they're just on there. They're not even doing limiting per se. They're just like catching transients and loud sounds that go into them. I have a whole nother video. I'll also put the link in the description below to that video as well, where I go more in depth on how to set up the routing and why I have all these limiters on here. But to briefly summarize, having the limiters on all the individual groups, so here the Pro L, allows me to get to a mastering level in stages, so that way each limiter doesn't have to do as much work. So if I was sending all this information just to the master limiter, that master limiter would have all this information fighting for the control of the threshold. So all these different things would be triggering the threshold of that master limiter. And by doing it in stages, it allows each stage to like do its work more effectively on the individual like group of sounds. For instance, if like the sub bass was hitting, like if we got rid of all the limiters on here and we sent everything directly to the master, the sub bass is probably going to be decently loud and can actually duck down all the rest of the information whenever the sub bass hits, and we don't want that. That's another reason why this particular style of mixing works for electronic music. And also I want to mention that this is traditionally the wrong advice. And like for genres like pop music, R&B, you know, jazz, subtler things, even rock and roll, this technique won't necessarily work for those styles of music. This is like an electronic dance music production technique. I've been doing private tutorials recently, and something I see a lot of people say are like, what levels do you have your different elements at? Like, what numbers are you looking at, you know, in the dBs and whatnot? I don't know if you'll notice here, but look, they're all at 0. Every single one of these groups here is at 0. Sometimes I'll change it on different songs, but oh, look here on the snare, plus 4.9. We'll get into why that is later. The reason why I say not to necessarily pay attention to the numbers so much and more trust your ears on these things, and then also in combination with using span, which we'll get into here in a second. The thing is if you're paying too much attention to these numbers, the volume of the actual tracks themselves are going to be all over the place as well, depending upon the sample and like how you're playing them and the compression. So I tend just to not pay attention as much to all the numbers. Another reason why I feel like focusing on the numbers is a little bit deceptive is that the perception element in mixing. Like, just because something is loud doesn't mean it's perceived as loud, and vice versa. So next I want to show y'all span. Some of y'all, if you haven't already, go check out my span tutorial where I show how to use this. It is definitely the most life-changing plugin that I've used. And the main thing we're going to be looking at here is this -30 line. Also like the shape of the track. So here I'll play some of the drop. So I want to show y'all the shape. So you can see that the average height of the low end equals the average height of the high end. And I just feel like I've seen this shape in so many really amazing mixes. And then you'll see this downward slope. And then there's like a dip here in between the sub frequencies and the rest of everything. This helps separates the subwoofer, the content that's being sent to the subwoofer versus the content that's being sent to the mids and the highs and whatnot. In this particular track, there's a bit more of the low mid range, and I just did that because it feels good. It feels warmer this way, but a lot of other tracks will continue this slope down. And you can also see a little bit of attenuation here on the high end. Let's listen to a couple of the individual groups. Let's listen to the bass. So you can see here, this is where the low end really gets most of its information, and that mid content. You can see a duck here in the 1000 hertz range. And then also you can see that there's quite a bit of space over the top end of the bass. Now, if we were to switch to the drum group, I'm going to highlight all three drum groups. So you can see in this shape, there's quite a bit of space here in the 300 to 2000 hertz range. You can see the kick there. But then you can see that a lot of the high range here is what's filling in that extra space where the basses were a bit lower down here at -42. And so a large part of it is like leaving that space for the other elements. And now let's listen to the melodic and vocal groups together. There's not as much happening in these groups for the drop, but you can see here where there's those two cuts in both the basses and the snares around the 1000 hertz range. This is the area in which these instruments can really shine through. And so everything has sort of got its place in the frequency spectrum, which is an important thing to note when mixing, is to which elements fit into which part of the spectrum. A big way to achieve that result is through arrangement and sample selection. So if we see here, there is basically only one bass sound happening at any given time. You can see it's chopped in between the main bass sounds and these like little edits. And like usually I take away all the bass while another thing is happening. And also here in the melodic group, you know, there's just not much going on, and what does go on, it's being low cut, so it doesn't interfere with the sub bass at all. Also real quick, I want to show that the verse is actually a quite different shape and span than the drop. So you can see here that everything is sort of averaged out. Still, the average height of the lows equals the average height of the highs. There's just a bit more mid-range content, and you can see the slopes in the low end and the high end. And overall, it's just not as loud as the drop. All right, so now I want to show a couple examples of mixing techniques used in this song. First of all, I've already mentioned this, but low cutting every element that doesn't have a sub bass element. Here in the effects section, sometimes I'll cut out the low end on the group, but I believe there's some impact sounds in here that I wanted to retain the sub in them. And so every other element though is being EQ'd out somewhere between 100 and 250 hertz, around in that range, even more on some of these sounds. Same goes here inside the drum group. Things are being cut out. Everything that I don't intend to be in the sub range, I get rid of it. Something I like to do also, particularly with drums, is I like to compress them together, like all the different groups, add some sort of compression. And I particularly use this thing called the Magic Box, which is part of my Magic Rack series, which some of y'all are familiar with. And if you're not familiar with them, definitely go check them out. I'll talk more about them. So let's listen to this drum group, and I'll turn on and off the post-process or the group processing. Back on. Now off. So what's happening here is I'm bumping the fundamental of the kick a little bit. At specifically 55.2 hertz, because that's the key of the song. I'm cutting the highs a tad because I have the top drums layer that wants to take up that part of the range, and I'm boosting the 1K range just because I felt it was lacking a little bit of that body space. And here, the Magic Rack box with two knobs. This is essentially OTT, upwards, downwards compression, and a glue compressor all together, but I've just really nailed the settings, and here without it, it sounds like this. And so it's a subtle thing, and it's meant to be a subtle thing. You can easily overdo it like this. That's not the sound I'm going for. I want to have like natural sounding drums. And also here I have a transient shaper in which I'm basically making everything tighter by increasing the attack of the transient and pulling down on the sustain, therefore making every drum hit just a little bit shorter in length. That's also a good way to give space for other elements as well. Next, let's go back and talk about this snare. So this snare is so loud. Doesn't perceive to be that loud. It is the loudest thing in the entire mix. Something I've done here also is I've found the fundamental of the frequency. I found the fundamental of the snare by looking in span. You can see there's the fundamental. And so I find the frequency of it, and I look at the key of the song, and I found 184 hertz was the key of the song. I believe, is this in E? I think it's in E. And so I wanted to boost that fundamental there to give the snare a little bit more tone, and then also cut out the sub range of it. The snare is being sent directly to the master, and so that's the thing that the master limiter was really squishing the most, that was peaking at +10. I just felt like that would help the snare cut through the mix the most. I've even seen Virtual Riot tracks where he's like clipping his snare at like +14, you know? And so I just want to reiterate that the rules that I learned in going to like music school, there aren't really any rules, and the way that you get to the achieved sound, however you get there, you get there. There's no necessarily proper way to get there. Also, something to note is that the snares during the verse are much quieter and are a completely different sample than the drop snare. And the reason for this is that, you know, there's just two different energy levels in the song. There's the verse, which is like the chilled, vibey kind of thing, funky, and then it goes into like the heavy drop. The same snare throughout the song just wouldn't have the same vibe. So next I want to look at the bass. There's really not much going on the main group other than some limiting, or it's not even going down the gain, it's just catching anything that hits the limiter. I have my multi-band sidechain on here. So basically I have two bands, one high, one low, and everything in the low band is being sidechained to the kick, and everything in the high band is being sidechained to the snare, because like those are the actual frequency ranges in which those two instruments are hitting. And so I don't want to necessarily duck the high end of my basses when the kick is happening, and I don't want to duck the sub for sure of my basses whenever the snare hits. So here is the main bass sound. I was right, it is an E. So on here you can see I had some processing earlier, and I actually took it off. And I had also some transient shaping on it, and all these things were trying to like make it beefier, but honestly, it was making it too beefy. It wasn't like sitting in the track correctly. So a big part of processing is knowing when to take away things and when you've overdone it. Also, I felt like I was just even overdoing it even more, so I put in a mid-side EQ. So here, instead of, it's usually set to stereo for the EQ, you can switch it to MS and then click the edit button to switch between the mid band and the side bands. And here I'm basically just bringing down the sides and cutting out the sub from the sides. And here's the difference with that. It honestly sounds better by itself without the sides cut out, but in context of the mix and everything, I felt that it gave the bass a more defined position in the center by cutting out more of those sides and then letting the more melodic elements and drums take up the side information. Get it like that. Yeah. Now here I want to play the second drop and show you all the post-processing here on the bass here. Get it like that, y'all. Cool. Here's the main sound. And you can see here we have a lot of EQing and post-processing on the sound. I'm going to play the sound without all the post-processing. It's like a shadow of itself. So what's going on here? One, it's being compressed here with the Magic Box. Definitely recommend checking those out if you haven't used them. We have a multi-band amp on here. This is part of the Magic Racks as well. And let's hear the difference without it. It's width. And so this is distorting with different types of distortion, different parts of the frequency band. So you can see here, there's 3 different bands, a low, mid, and high, and they're being affected in different amounts and with different types of distortion. Definitely a really amazing, able to interact, to mess around with. Now here you can see I'm doing some more EQing, and the reason for these shapes is watching this bass in span, and then coming back and trying to create that shape that I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, where there's the curve downward and the slope back upward. And then some more EQing after that, some more compression, and a final little bit of EQing after that. So let's look in span before and after the post-processing. Here it is with all the post-processing. You can really see that it's got that shape where it's coming down and then coming back up. Now if we were to remove the post-processing, you can see that the bass is way louder and that all this content over here is just like not loud enough. And also there's some like interesting gaps here. There's like a little too much here. So you can see I've tried to fill in this gap by boosting it there with that EQ, filling in this gap by boosting the EQ there. I wanted to get more out of these lower notes and less out of these higher notes in the bass, thusly this shape over here. Next, after the distortion, let's turn this back on. So now after the multi-band amp, you can see here I wanted to use this EQ to bring that sub back down. I wanted to tame some of this information right here in the 400 to 600 range, and so there's that dip there. I wanted to boost some of this information in this range so you can see the up curve there, and then I wanted to tame some of this over here while boosting this area, thusly this shape here. And then also I wanted to do some more taming, particularly on this frequency here, thusly this big dip. And then I think I wanted to do some more boosting in this 300, 400 hertz range, and thusly that shape right there. So now after that EQ, it's more of this shape, and you can still see some of these are poking up here, and so thusly why I found what specifically those two frequencies are. 97. So come down here and check it out. Yep, 2097. Cool. I think that will give you an idea of like how to get that shape by just using the EQ to really force it that way and doing it subtly over many layers, and then using the a multi-band amp to like bring out new harmonics. Next, I wanted to show a bit of this slap bass, particularly this automation we did on here. So here's the slap bass part. So really, I just want to show y'all here on the EQ, you can see an automation that like right before the drop, it's boosting the bass, but just not as much. And then here on the drop, it boosts the bass a ton. And that's because during this section, there's not as many other elements that are affecting the limiters. And so I wanted to, if I didn't have this cut in the amount of boost in it, it would just be boosting the sub even more. And so I wanted it to sit at a similar level as to what it would sit at here. Next, let's look at the melodic chord section. So on here, I'm going to play a bit of the verse. And so we've got some compression on there, and some transient shaping, which is interesting. I don't normally do this on melodic section, but for this song, all the melodic elements are almost percussive at the same time too, with the flute and the guitar. And so let's listen to it without the post-processing. Here's with it, now without. So we can see that these magic boxes here are really doing a lot. And then the transient shaping, I'm just boosting the attack of the high end there to get some more smack out of them. Now here on the actual guitar itself, you can see my EQing. Again, some transient shaping to get some more attack out of them. And here it is with and without the EQ. Now it sounds more full with the EQ on, but the thing is, in the context of the track, cutting out this space here allows for the bass guitar to really sit in that space, while allowing this with the compression later on to boost these high end and allow that to sit up there. See, if I take off the EQ, it sort of dominates the mix for a second, while having it back, it's more of a supporting instrument rather than like the main sound. The main sound really in here is the vocals. So real quick on here, I wanted to show y'all, I actually turned down the width of this and also did another mid-side EQ, cutting out some of the high end of the sides and some more EQ, but I want to show it with and without all the post-processing. And so it's like less wide, and I wanted to have the vocals be more front and center, and so I made them less wide here with the utility by turning down the width from 100 down to 59. And also there were some resonant frequencies here I wanted to get rid of. If we look in span, just this area over here. Yeah, I thought that was interesting to note. Also here on the second verse, there's this interesting organ sound. So with this organ, you can see that the EQs are really extreme here. So let's look at the organ by itself through span. And you can see this happens a lot with melodic elements, like particularly like more chiller sounds. They're comprised of lots of sine tones. And you can see that they can get pretty loud. And so without the EQ of this, it just gets a little out of control. You can see some of them are like almost going off the chart, and they're sort of piercing. And this sound is not the main element in the song, and so I don't want it to be at the forefront. And so I find those exact frequencies here in Spanned, like that 117, and then yeah, I'll find those specific frequencies in here, type it in, turn the Q all the way up, and turn the gain down. And so that way these sit back in the mix rather than up front in your face. So here it is with it, without. So those I thought were some interesting points in this mix. Again, I can't stress the importance. If you haven't already checked out the Magic Ableton racks, definitely go do so now. I'm going to include a link below where you guys can grab those on my Gumroad, again, to show the differences here with and without them. Really brings it out here in this bass particularly. I think this is where I use it the most, on this bass sound. Without the magic boxes, it just wouldn't sound as full and awesome. Yeah. Lots of little things add up. Oh, also another favorite that people always love, this one, is the robot maker. So here's like a little vocal without the robot maker. A little woo. Here it is with the robot maker. Yeah, adds in like that cool robot kind of effect. Also, here's the rap vocalizer. There's like all these like quiet little cut vocal sounds in the background of the song. In the yeah, and so here it is without the rap vocalizer. Sounds dry and quiet. Yeah, just adds a lot of character. Definitely go check those out. And then also here on the chord section, definitely makes a big difference with and without the magic boxes. With the magic boxes, you really want to use them subtly because, again, you can overblow them. Yeah, I like to use it very subtly, anywhere between 3 and 20. And then there's the other magic box that has more settings that you can dial in, and they have different settings on them, and so they have different flavors. I love using both of them. Use them in every song. Hi aliens, if you like this, please click like and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you like the song, go save it on Spotify. I have a link below for that. And again, huge thanks to Zed's Dead for adding that to their Spotify playlist. All right, peace aliens.